Hey guys, so of course we had a couple YCS level events this past week, and so as usual I wanted to sort of map out the most played hand traps and staples that were played in the topping list. I understand that Rage of the Abyss is around the corner and the Mall Charming Fualos, for example, will change things a lot, but at the same time there are still some events that's going to be happening before then, so I thought hopefully this will still be helpful. And as always, definitely go check out those discount codes for Yu-Gi-Oh! Singles as well as sleeves, and also a big thanks to YGOproduct.com as always for having these topping deck lists available. Anyways, in terms of an overview of the hand traps, so in terms of the main deck, the median number was 12. Now, admittedly, the last time I did this kind of analysis, it was actually a couple of months ago, I think around NAWCQ time even, but even then, comparing to that, it was actually lower, which is a little surprising, right? Because back then, we had about 15 hand traps in the main, we had a dominance of Snake-Eye, of course, and this was just when Fiendsmith stuff was also available. So my guess is that if you look at some of the top cut breakdowns of both the two YCS level events, you did have a lot of Yubel and Tenpai, of course, which can play a lot of hand traps, also Snake-Eye, but outside of that, there was still like roughly like 40% where really they were some of the other decks, like let's say like Ritual Beast, even like Runic decks, there's both of which are not going to be playing a lot of hand traps in the main, so that might be part of the reason as well, not necessarily just because they try to shift towards board breakers, for example. In the side, it was around 5, and we are going to talk about some of the hand traps on the side that maybe were not as conventional. In terms of the board breakers, it did go up a little bit though, median number being 4 in the main, and then you had something like, let's say, board breakers on the side was a little bit lower this time around, and we'll cover those as well. Anyways, let's just cover the most common hand traps that were played in the topping list that were at least publicly available, and we're going to start with Ash. Just recently when I did a staple tier list, which was based on only regional level information, and again, thanks to YGOproduct.com for the data, but at that point, Infinite Impermanence was actually number 1, but it looks like Ash is kind of overtaken his number 1 spot as usual. I mean, you do have Yubel, like something on, I guess, some Sarah Lotus is still nice, and it's just generic. You also have something like, even on Tenpai, Sangen, Kaiman, for example, that's a good one. Obviously, Branded has really fallen off a lot, so there's and this is Ash was always known for that, but not doesn't come up as much for that anymore. And then speaking of, we do have Imperm, nothing too much to say, and then you have Molchurmi Perlia. So this has been actually increasing compared to the last time I did this, and so it is obviously really good. For the most part, it is played on the side deck right now, and of course heading into the new Rage of the Abyss format, I'm sure pretty much everyone who can get access to the card will be main decking Fualos, and maybe even playing this along with it in the main. Maybe they still delegate it to the side, but nonetheless, as long as you draw one of the two, you might be able to draw into the other one and then continue on from there as well. So gonna be quite the crazy format, so not looking forward to that. You do have Nibiru, you have some of the top decks right now, which are Yubel, Tenpai taking up the most, the 2 top spots, which are not, Nibiru is not really great against those decks, but I guess you still have a lot of different other decks, right? As I mentioned, there was at least a bit more diversity, I guess, in the top cut compared to when Snake-Eye was tier 0 essentially, so Nibiru will still come up, I suppose, against those other strategies. And then Bist shows in general, so I decided to just sort of group it with the Magnet picture. Of course, something like Tenpai, they may just only play the Magnet and none of the other Bist shows, but nonetheless, I think something that is maybe worth noting is that I was also seeing a lot more play of Baldrake as well. Its effect, its secondary effect, I think, can come up, and that's something to watch out for. Then you have effect failure, so you still have some targeting negation that's pretty popular, but at least in the case of Ghost Mourner, it's definitely fallen down. You have Shifter, which, you have Tenpai, they're going to be playing it. Some will just side it instead, but also I was noticing some, even like some other, Snake-Eye decks, for example, they would just side like one Shifter for like their cross-out target, so that is something that's happening. And of course, Ritual Beast, I kind of spoke about it earlier, they have topped multiple times now so far, and Shifter, of course, is one of their mainstays. And next we have Droll. Kind of funny that it's fallen down a lot, right? I mean, because when first the Fiendsmith stuff was entered into the mix in Infinite Forbidden for the NAWCQ format, I know a lot of us, expected Droll to be really, really popular, but turns out it wasn't really all that amazing. I never really felt like it was a game winner when I resolved this. And against Yubel, it can be good, but, oftentimes they might just make Phantom Yubel before you even have a chance to do this, so it's kind of hit or miss. This Spooky Dogwood, on the other hand, that's a card that, actually several people I think have been voicing that perhaps it should be banned, mainly because of the time rules. It's just single-handedly will really win you the game, essentially, in kind of like time situation, especially in a case where, they may take their time in game 2 to ensure that, if they were to draw this card, then they can definitely win. Otherwise, it would have just been a tie. So definitely with the time rules, this card can be rather frustrating. And then Ghost Ogre. So this has been sort of popular from my understanding in the next format, Rage of the Abyss, with like the Azmina cards. I heard this card will be better for sure. I mean, right now, I mean, against Yubel still comes up. Against Tenpai, they did lose their field spell. They only have it to 1, but you know what? I think if you do have the flexibility and hand trap space, you can might as well run it if you can. So next we have Fiendsmith. I'm noticing, several lists are definitely enjoying like the multiple draws off, whether, Fiendsmith or the Mulcharmies. Of course, if you resolve Fiendsmith first, you're not going to be able to do the Mulcharmies because you control a card unless maybe your opponent gets rid of Fiendsmith for some reason. And you know what? It does have its kind of targeting protection effect, which might come up as well. You have Ghost Runner, as mentioned earlier. This has kind of fallen off in terms of play compared to what it was before when Snake-Eye was tier 0. We'll kind of briefly touch on this though once we get to the staples section. You also have Dominus Purge. This is one of the newer additions, a true hand trap in that sense, kind of joining the likes of Imperm now as a trap that you can play from the hand, even during your opponent's turn, for example. And we have the new Dominus card coming as well in Rage of the Abyss. This current one, the Purge, essentially is there to like prevent like your opponent from adding a card to the hand. The next one will of course be kind of like preventing a special sound from the deck, so it's kind of like Ash broken into multiple pieces, but at least you don't play into like talents or something, or thrusts. And then next two is actually kind of interesting. You have Gamma, which of course is at 1 now, really practically sees no play. But even Delta, this is, for those of you not familiar, it's the one that negates spells rather than monster effects like Gamma. I remember the last time I even remotely saw this kind of see play was when something like the DPE engine was very popular, and just to negate Diffusion Destiny. But other than that, this has not really seen that much play, but a couple lists were playing it. So moving on to the most common side deck staples, we actually have Call by the Grave at number 1. So I mean, certainly let me know in the comments, the reasoning for this. If I'm assuming it's not just because of trying to stop hand traps, because hand traps have been around quite a while, and Call by the Grave has not been in this top spot for quite a while. Ironically, as I was just talking about the DPE format, and that's I think the last time we saw Call by the Grave see so much play, just to kind of like banish that DPE from the opponent's grave. I mean, right now maybe it's because let's say Heretic Seal, special summoning like Chimera, where Call by the Grave can be really nice on top of stopping hand traps, of course, or maybe even like Phantom Yubel as well. So certainly has applications. Talents, we kind of talked about it, playing to hand traps, or rather monster effects, and then this can be live quite often nowadays. And Cosmic Cyclone, this is still really good. Yubel being the best deck, there's a lot of cards you can Cosmic in that one. Tenpai Dragons, they did lose Sangan Summoning, so maybe Cosmic doesn't actually come up as much, but when it does, obviously it's going to be very, very critical because they only have that one field spell, and they're just not going to be able to get it back. You've also seen Labrynth top a couple times in this recent YCS, 2 making top 16 actually, and Cosmic can also be quite devastating against them too, especially because if they did open it at least, which seems like almost always the case, where they try to set their Labrynth traps on your turn in the end phase, and holding onto that Cosmic in your hand and then blowing that out is quite a nice feeling. And speaking of blowouts, Feather Duster, nothing too much to really say there. Yubel, they do have a lot of back row on top of their monster interruptions, so it's kind of nice. And also you have Tenpai really playing a lot of board breakers in general. Droplets, you know what? Droplets and Dark Road probably necessary, just because Yubel, turn 1 board is really, really devastating. It's just incredibly strong. Lots of negates, just a lot of different interruptions. I think you need all that you can get. We did talk about a little bit about Thrust. I mean, at this point, you do see a big drop off in terms of how often it's played among the topping list. I mean, you did have something like D-Barrier that was still up there, and of course, Thrust can at least set that. Maybe even like the Dominus cards, if you play it, that just gives you another one to set if you already hard open the trap that you would have set off Thrust anyway. So, you know what? There are some additional options now. Cross out. Aside from the hand traps, maybe doesn't see as much play as before. We're not seeing like a total dominance of tier 0 Snake-Eye, and in the mirror match, this can be pretty deadly. And this is one of the cards maybe people would have expected perhaps get hit to at least 2. I believe it is hit to 2 in like various other formats like OCG Master Duel, but you know what? I do think that it's the tier 1 decks, going first, are already strong enough as it is to be able to stop hand traps on top of that, on top of Call by the Grave and 3 crossouts. It can get a little too much in my view. Then you have Solemn Judgment. So this was actually seen a lot in the Tenpai Dragon list actually for going first, I guess. Even some Yubel lists were playing it, which is kind of insane to me because they already have a couple Omni Negates to begin with, but you know what, can't judge there. And then you also have something like Fenrir. I didn't really want to include this because realistically, as you can see, it was all main deck I've played. This was more so because there's, something like Chimera, Snake-Eye, just like Chimera variants, rather than actually playing Fenrir purely for the sake of being kind of like a board breaker. But for now, I did add it, but just keep that note in mind. So next we have Melodious. So this one, honestly, the effect always confuses me. I did recently do a profile with Mackie, who talked with Yubel. He was actually saying, you know, he played like the one Mourner in this to stop that Chimera, for example, because the Chimera is actually a wind. It also has 0 attack when it's summoned off Hieratic Seal. So I guess that's where it can come up, which is kind of cool. Definitely can lead to some pretty interesting interactions. Book of Eclipse. This has been I think also solid, pretty popular, not just because as a board breaker, it kind of essentially is like a non-once per turn Dark Ruler almost in terms of baiting out negates, but also the fact that it can stop, or rather dodge Imperm as well when you're going first. And in Ritual Beast case, they've also mentioned about how you use this and then, you know, flip your guys face down if you're kind of threatened with a Nib, because Nib only tributes face-up monsters. So I think that's a pretty cool interaction, definitely a really flexible card as well. And then you have some other generic board breakers, Lightning Storm, as I mentioned. You know, when you have Tenpai Dragons making a lot of the top cut representation, you're going to see a lot of these generic board breakers in their skill drain. Unfortunately, it's at 1, but they're still going to play it. You had Stun still top. You even have something like White Force decks actually do pretty well recently, and they're able to play skill drain as well, at least if they went first. And then you again have some other generic board wipes like Dark Ruler. We talked about that Yubel board. It's really, really strong. There was actually even Regeki seen in 8 list, and that's really more so something that you're just going to see in Tenpai. So now in terms of the quote-unquote tech choices that I noticed in the topping lists that were available, Power Sync Stone was one of them. It was seen in Labrynth and a Melodious list, I believe. And so essentially, anytime a monster effect's activated, you place 1 Spellstone counter. When there's 2 counters, all face-up monsters on the field cannot activate their effects, and their effects are negated. So I'm going to assume for Melodious, because of Bacha, essentially where their monster effects, their activation of effects cannot be negated, I'm going to assume they can still play through this, and that's why they're playing it. So it's, you know, a pretty strong floodgate if you are able to run it. And then Blink Out, this was in the Rika list that came second with Julius. So essentially, he played it in the side. It looks like it's 1 away to essentially kind of clear the board, or rather clear the opponent's board of a problematic Link monster. He was talking about the Rage, but he was actually saying also going first, he can use it to kind of like target and dodge, like let's say on the Dryas, or even if they do negate Dryas with like Phantom, he would just like bring back the Loci and just go through it again. So I thought that was a really cool choice there, and certainly you can look into that if you're playing plans. Alright guys, so that was it for the breakdown of the most played hand traps and staples in the past couple of YCS events this weekend. So hopefully that was helpful in helping you prepare your list for your upcoming events. There's YCS Cancun coming very, very soon, and I hope to see you at YCS Niagara as well, which of course is when Rage of the Abyss is going to be legal. It's going to be a little chaotic, or maybe very chaotic, but nonetheless, I'm really excited to see some of you as well. So anyways, big thanks to all of you for watching. Huge thanks to my patrons and sponsors for the continued support and well. Take care guys.